Marcus Williams was sitting on the front porch of his small house when he heard his mother scream. The 7-year-old boy jumped to his feet and ran toward the backyard where the sound came from. What he saw made his blood turn cold and his heart beat so fast he thought it might explode right out of his chest. 3 tall creatures with gray skin and huge black eyes were dragging his mother Diana toward a strange silver object that floated above the ground without making any sound at all. The creatures had long, thin arms and moved in a way that seemed wrong, like they were not used to walking on Earth. Diana was fighting hard and kicking her legs, but the creatures were surprisingly strong for how thin they looked. She was screaming for Marcus to run and hide, but the boy could not move because his legs felt like they were made of stone. The silver craft had lights underneath that pulsed with colors Marcus had never seen before, and they hurt his eyes when he looked directly at them. His mother managed to break one arm free, and she reached toward Marcus with tears running down her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but one of the creatures touched her neck with a small device, and she went limp in their arms. Marcus finally found his voice and screamed as loud as he could, but there was nobody around to hear him because they lived far from town, and their nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. The creatures pulled Diana into an opening in the bottom of the craft, and then they looked at Marcus. For a moment the boy thought they were going to take him too, and pure terror filled every part of his body. But then the creatures turned away and climbed into their ship. The opening closed like water flowing together, and the craft shot straight up into the sky so fast that Marcus barely saw it move. In 3 seconds it was gone, and the only proof that anything had happened was the strange burn marks in the grass where the craft had been floating. Marcus stood frozen for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. His mind could not understand what he had just seen. His mother was gone. Those things had taken her and flown away into the sky. He started crying so hard that he could barely breathe. His father had died 2 years ago in a car accident, and now his mother was gone too. He was alone, and he did not know what to do. The police would never believe him if he told them aliens took his mother. Nobody would believe a 7-year-old kid with a story that sounded like it came from a movie. Then Marcus heard something that gave him hope. It was the sound of motorcycle engines coming down the highway that ran past his house. He wiped his tears with his sleeve and ran as fast as his legs could carry him toward the road. He had to get help. He had to find someone who would believe him and help him get his mother back. He did not care if they thought he was crazy. He had to try. Marcus reached the road just as a group of motorcycles came around the bend. There were about 12 of them, and they were big, loud machines with chrome that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The riders wore leather jackets and had tattoos on their arms. Most people would be scared of them, but Marcus was desperate. He ran into the middle of the road, waving his arms and screaming for help. The lead motorcycle had to brake hard to avoid hitting him, and the others stopped behind him. The lead rider was a big man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos. He pulled off his helmet, and Marcus could see concern in his eyes. The man looked angry at first, probably because Marcus had almost caused an accident. But when he saw the tears on the boy's face and how terrified he looked, his expression changed to worry. He got off his bike and knelt down so he was at eye level with Marcus. The man asked what was wrong and where Marcus's parents were. His voice was deep but not unkind. Marcus tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled and mixed with sobs. He said that things from the sky took his mother, and they had gray skin and big eyes and a silver ship. He pointed toward his house and said it just happened only a few minutes ago. He begged the man to help him get his mother back because she was all he had left in the world. The other bikers had gathered around now, and Marcus could hear some of them whispering. One woman with red hair and kind eyes knelt down next to the bearded man. She put her hand gently on Marcus's shoulder and told him to take a deep breath and explain again more slowly. Marcus did his best to tell the story again, and this time it made more sense. He told them about the creatures and the floating craft and the strange lights and how his mother fought, but they took her anyway. Most of the bikers looked at each other with expressions that said they thought Marcus was making it up or maybe had watched too many science fiction movies. But the bearded man, whose name was Jake Morrison, did not look doubtful. He stood up and told the others to wait there. He walked with Marcus back toward the house and asked the boy to show him exactly where it happened. Marcus led him to the backyard and pointed at the burn marks in the grass. Jake knelt down and touched the burned grass. It was still warm and it smelled strange like burnt metal and something else Jake could not identify. The grass was burned in a perfect circle, and the pattern was too precise to be from a regular fire. Jake pulled out his phone and tried to make a call, but his phone was acting strange. The screen kept flickering and making a weird buzzing sound. He noticed that his radio on his belt was doing the same thing. There was some kind of electromagnetic interference in the area. Jake called over a man named Carlos Rodriguez, who used to be an engineer in the Navy. Carlos had an old Geiger counter on his bike because he collected old military equipment. He brought it over and turned it on. The device immediately started clicking rapidly. Carlos's eyes went wide and he looked at Jake with an expression that said this was serious. There was radiation here and not the normal background kind. This was something else entirely. Jake looked down at Marcus and made a decision. He did not know if he believed in aliens or flying saucers, but he knew that something very wrong had happened here. This little boy had just lost his mother and he was terrified and alone. Jake had served in the Marines and he had made a promise long ago to protect those who could not protect themselves. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and told him that they were going to help. They were going to find his mother and bring her home no matter what it took. The other bikers gathered around when Jake told them what Carlos had found. The woman with red hair, whose name was Lisa Chen, said she had heard rumors when she served as an army medic. Rumors about the government knowing more about visitors from space than they told the public. Another biker named Danny Cooper, who had worked in Air Force intelligence, nodded slowly. He said he had seen things in classified briefings that he was not supposed to talk about, but maybe it was time to break that silence. Jake looked at his crew and then at Marcus. He told the boy that they were going to do something that most people would think was impossible. They were going to go after the things that took his mother. Marcus looked up at Jake with hope shining through his tears. He asked if Jake really meant it, and Jake nodded. The Iron Riders always kept their promises, and they were not about to start breaking them now. Marcus hugged Jake's leg and cried, but this time they were tears of hope instead of despair. The Iron Riders moved their motorcycles off the road and parked them near the Williams house. Jake told everyone to search the property for any evidence of what had happened. He wanted to make sure they had proof before they did anything else because, if they were going to chase after aliens, they needed to know for certain that aliens were real. Marcus stayed close to Jake because he felt safe near the big man who had promised to help him. Carlos Rodriguez walked around the burn marks in the grass with his Geiger counter. He was writing numbers in a small notebook and shaking his head. He told Jake that the radiation signature was not like anything from Earth. It was not from a nuclear source or any kind of weapon he knew about. The pattern was too clean and too focused. Whatever had been hovering here was using technology that humans did not have, or at least not technology that regular people knew about. Lisa Chen was looking at Diana's bedroom window, which had a view of the backyard. She found scratches on the window frame like Diana had tried to hold on while being pulled away. There were also marks on the ground that looked like something heavy had been dragged. Lisa had seen a lot of bad things during her time as a medic in war zones, but this was different. This felt wrong in a way that made her skin crawl. She called Jake over and showed him what she found. Danny Cooper was the most quiet of the group. He stood near the burn marks and stared at them with his arms crossed. Jake asked him what he was thinking, and Danny finally spoke. He said that when he worked in Air Force intelligence about 5 years ago, he had seen briefings about unidentified craft. The official line was always that these were weather balloons or experimental aircraft, but Danny had seen photographs that looked exactly like what Marcus described. Silver objects that moved without sound and could accelerate faster than anything humans could build. The briefings always ended with warnings not to discuss what they had seen with anyone outside the program. Jake asked Danny if he thought the government knew about aliens, and Danny nodded slowly. He said it was more than just knowing. There had been contact for years, maybe even decades. Some alien species were friendly and some were not. The government kept it secret because they were afraid of how people would react. Danny said there were agreements with certain species and rules about what they could and could not do on Earth. But there were always criminals and rogues who broke the rules, just like there were human criminals who broke laws. Marcus interrupted and asked if that meant the government knew about the gray creatures that took his mother. Danny knelt down and looked the boy in the eyes. He said yes, probably, but the government moved slowly. There would be reports and committees and meetings. It could take weeks or months before anyone official did anything. By then, Diana could be anywhere in the solar system or even beyond. Marcus started crying again, and Jake put his hand on the boy's shoulder to comfort him. One of the other bikers, whose name was Pete Anderson, came running from the neighbor's house down the road. He was carrying a tablet computer and he looked excited. Pete said the neighbor had security cameras that covered part of the road and the Williams property. The neighbor was an old man named Mr. Hughes who did not trust anyone and had cameras everywhere. Pete had convinced him to let them look at the footage from earlier that afternoon. Everyone gathered around as Pete played the video. At first it just showed the empty road and the side of the Williams house. Then at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon, according to the timestamp on the video, the sky got bright. A silver disc-shaped object appeared out of nowhere like it had materialized from thin air. It lowered itself toward the Williams' backyard and hovered there. The video quality was not great, but everyone could clearly see something that was, not from this world. The camera angle did not show the actual abduction, but it showed the craft sitting there for about 4 minutes. Then it shot straight up and vanished in the blink of an eye. The speed was impossible. Nothing made by humans could move like that. Carlos calculated that based on how fast it disappeared, the craft had accelerated to at least 15,000 miles per hour in under 2 seconds. The G-forces alone would have killed any human pilot, but apparently these aliens could handle it. Jake made copies of the video on several phones. This was evidence that could not be ignored. But he also knew that if they took this to the police or the military, they would confiscate it and Marcus would never see his mother again. The system was too slow and too careful. They needed to find someone who could help them outside official channels, someone who knew about the aliens and could point them in the right direction. Danny said he knew someone who might help. Her name was Patricia Hayes and she used to work for Air Force Intelligence just like Danny. But Patricia had left the service because she disagreed with how the government handled the alien situation. She thought people had a right to know the truth. She now worked with an underground organization that tracked illegal alien activity on Earth. They helped abduction victims and their families. They were not official and they did not have government backing, but they had contacts and information that nobody else had. Jake asked if Danny could get in touch with Patricia, and Danny said he would try. He walked away from the group and made several phone calls. It took about 20 minutes, but finally he came back with good news. Patricia was willing to meet with them, but she was 3 states away in Nevada. She could not come to Montana, but if they could get to her location, she would help them. She had access to tracking data and knew people in the secret space program who might be willing to bend the rules. The bikers talked among themselves about what to do next. Some of them had jobs and families they needed to get back to. The charity event they were heading to would have to happen without them. But Jake was not going to force anyone to come on this crazy mission. He told his crew that anyone who wanted to leave could leave with no hard feelings. This was going to be dangerous and probably illegal. They might end up in jail or worse. Nobody left. Every single member of the Iron Riders said they were in. Lisa said she did not become a medic to stand by while people suffered. Carlos said his engineering skills might be useful. Pete said he was good with computers and technology. Danny obviously had knowledge they would need. The others all had their own reasons, but they all agreed on one thing. A little boy had lost his mother, and if they did not help him, nobody would. Marcus looked around at all these tough-looking bikers who were willing to risk everything for him and his mother. He asked Jake why they were doing this. They did not know him or his mother. They were just strangers on the road. Jake knelt down again and put both hands on Marcus's shoulders. He said that when he was in the Marines, he learned that you never leave anyone behind. It did not matter if they were a fellow soldier or a civilian or even a stranger. If someone needed help, you helped them. That was what made humans different from monsters. Humans took care of each other. Jake asked Marcus if he wanted to come with them to Nevada. The boy nodded so hard his whole body shook. There was no way he was staying behind while others looked for his mother. Jake said okay, but Marcus had to promise to do exactly what he was told. This was going to be dangerous, and Marcus needed to stay safe so they could reunite him with Diana. Marcus promised and crossed his heart. The bikers packed up their gear and got ready to ride. It was getting dark, but they had a long way to go. Carlos estimated it would take them about 16 hours of hard riding to reach Nevada. They would stop for gas and food, but otherwise they would push through. Every minute they waited was a minute that Diana was in the hands of those creatures. Before they left, Jake went into the Williams house and found a photo of Diana. It was a picture of her smiling and holding Marcus when he was younger. Jake put the photo in his jacket pocket. He told Marcus that they would give this back to Diana in person. It was a promise, and Jake always kept his promises. Marcus believed him because he could see in Jake's eyes that the man meant every word. The motorcycles roared to life, and the Iron Riders headed west toward Nevada with Marcus, riding in a sidecar attached to Jake's bike. The boy looked back at his house one time and then faced forward. He did not know what was going to happen or if they would really find his mother. But for the first time since watching her get taken, he had hope. These strangers had become his protectors and his friends. Together they were going to do something that seemed impossible. They were going to chase aliens across the stars if they had to. The Iron Riders rode through the night and into the next morning. Marcus fell asleep in the sidecar several times but always woke up when they stopped for gas. His whole body ached from the vibration of the motorcycle, and his eyes were red from crying and lack of sleep. But he never complained once. Jake made sure the boy ate something at every stop and drank water. The other bikers treated Marcus like he was part of their crew, and that made him feel less alone. They reached Nevada in the late afternoon of the next day. Danny guided them to a location outside of a small town called Rachel. It was the middle of nowhere with nothing but desert and mountains. Patricia Hayes had told Danny to meet her at an old gas station that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The bikers pulled into the parking lot and turned off their engines. The sudden silence was strange after 16 hours of motor noise. A black SUV was parked behind the gas station. As the bikers got off their motorcycles, a woman stepped out of the vehicle. She was in her 40s with short brown hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore casual clothes but carried herself like someone with military training. This was Patricia Hayes. Patricia walked up to Danny and they shook hands. She looked at the rest of the group and then her eyes settled on Marcus. Her expression softened a bit when she saw how young and scared the boy looked. She asked if this was the child whose mother was taken, and Danny nodded. Patricia knelt down in front of Marcus and told him that she was going to do everything in her power to help. She had helped other families in similar situations. Sometimes they got their loved ones back and sometimes they did not, but they always tried. Jake showed Patricia the video from the neighbor's camera and the radiation readings that Carlos had taken. Patricia watched the video 3 times and then nodded. She said this was definitely a Zenthari abduction. The Zenthari were a dying alien species that had been trying to solve their extinction problem for centuries. They believed that human DNA held the key to saving their race. About 15 years ago, several alien species made first contact with Earth governments. Most of them were peaceful and willing to trade technology for resources. But the Zenthari had been banned from Earth after it was discovered. They were kidnapping humans for genetic experiments. Lisa asked why the government did not tell people about aliens if contact had been made 15 years ago. Patricia said it was complicated. The world governments were afraid of mass panic and economic collapse. They were also afraid of religious and social upheaval, so they made agreements with the friendly alien species to keep contact secret while they slowly prepared humanity for the truth. It was supposed to be revealed in stages over decades, but that meant people like Diana Williams were suffering in silence because the official channels moved too slowly. Carlos asked what happened to the people who were taken by the Zenthari. Patricia's expression became grim. She said the Zenthari usually kept their subjects alive because they needed living tissue samples, but the experiments were painful and traumatic. Most people who were rescued suffered from severe psychological damage. Some never fully recovered. The Zenthari did not see humans as people. They saw them as resources to be used. Marcus started crying when he heard this. He asked if his mother was being hurt right now. Patricia looked at the boy and did not lie to him. She said probably yes, but Diana was strong. The fact that the Zenthari took her meant they thought she had valuable genetic traits. They would keep her alive and relatively healthy because dead subjects were useless to them. It was not comforting news, but it was honest. Jake asked Patricia what they could do. She said she had been tracking the Zenthari ship that took Diana. It had left Earth's atmosphere and was heading toward the outer solar system. Based on its trajectory, it was going to a moon near Saturn, where the Zenthari had an illegal research facility. The facility was hidden from official Earth monitoring, but Patricia's organization had discovered it months ago. They had reported it to the authorities, but the response had been slow. There were diplomatic considerations and legal procedures. Nobody wanted to start an interstellar incident. Danny asked if there was anyone in the military who would help them. Patricia said there was one person who might. His name was Commander Vincent Shaw, and he was in charge of an Earth defense vessel called the Sentinel. Shaw was part of the secret space force that defended Earth from hostile aliens. He was a good man who had lost his own sister to an abduction years ago. Since then, he had been known to bend the rules when it came to rescue missions. But he could not do anything official without orders from above, and those orders were not coming. Patricia said she had already contacted Shaw and explained the situation. He was willing to meet with them, but he could not make any promises. His ship was currently docked at a hidden facility about 50 miles from where they were. The facility was underground and heavily guarded. Patricia had clearance to enter because of her past work with intelligence. She could get the bikers in, but they would have to leave their weapons behind. Security was very strict. The Iron Riders followed Patricia's SUV down a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. After about 30 minutes, they reached what looked like a small maintenance building with a few antennas. Patricia parked and told everyone to get out. She led them to the building and used a keycard to open the door. Inside was an elevator that only went down. They all crowded into the elevator and Patricia pressed a button. The doors closed and they began to descend. Marcus held Jake's hand as the elevator went down and down for what felt like several minutes. When the doors finally opened, they stepped out into a massive underground complex. The ceiling was hundreds of feet high and the space was filled with equipment and vehicles that looked like they came from a science fiction movie. Personnel in military uniforms walked around carrying tablets and tools. In the center of the complex was a spacecraft that took Marcus's breath away. The ship was called the Sentinel, and it was beautiful in a deadly way. It was about 300 feet long with a sleek design that looked both human and alien at the same time. The hull was a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light. There were no visible seams or rivets. Weapons ports lined the sides and the engines glowed with a faint blue light, even though the ship was powered down. This was a vessel built for combat and exploration. A man in a military uniform walked toward them. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a face that had seen too much. This was Commander Vincent Shaw. He shook hands with Patricia and then looked at the Iron Riders. He asked which one of them was Jake Morrison. Jake stepped forward and the two men sized each other up. Shaw asked Jake if he understood what he was asking for. Jake said yes, he was asking for Shaw to risk his career and possibly his life to save a woman he had never met. Shaw looked at Marcus and his expression softened, just like Patricia's had. He asked the boy what his name was. Marcus said his name and then asked if Shaw could really take them into space to find his mother. Shaw knelt down and told Marcus that he would try. He could not promise success, but he would try. That was all he could offer. Jake asked what the plan was. Shaw explained that his ship was supposed to be undergoing maintenance for another week, but the repairs were mostly complete and the Sentinel was space-worthy. He could take a small crew on what he would officially report as a test flight. If they happened to end up near Saturn and happened to find illegal Xanthari activity, well then he would have to investigate. It was a thin excuse and Shaw would probably face discipline when he got back, but he was willing to take that risk. Shaw said there was one condition. The Iron Riders would have to come along as civilian consultants. That way, if things went wrong, Shaw could say he was protecting civilians who had stumbled into the situation. It was a legal fiction, but it might keep everyone out of jail. The bikers all agreed immediately. Shaw also said that Marcus could come, but only if he stayed in the safe areas of the ship. Jake promised to keep the boy out of danger. The commander gave orders to his crew to prepare the ship for launch. He told the Iron Riders they had 2 hours to learn basic safety procedures. They would not have time for proper training, but Shaw's crew would teach them enough to survive in zero gravity and how to use emergency equipment. Lisa asked if there would be combat, and Shaw said probably yes. The Xanthari would not give up their research subjects without a fight. Marcus watched as the bikers were led away by crew members to begin their crash course in space travel. Patricia stayed behind with Marcus and Shaw. She told the commander that she was grateful he was doing this. Shaw said he just hoped they were not too late. The Xanthari research facility had been operating for months and dozens of humans were being held there. Even if they rescued Diana, there would be others who needed help. Commander Shaw looked at Marcus and made a promise. He said they would bring Diana home or they would die trying. Those were the only two options. Marcus believed him because Shaw had the same look in his eyes that Jake had. The look of someone who kept their promises no matter what. Marcus realized that he had been lucky. When those creatures took his mother, he had run to the road and found exactly the right people. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Jake and the other Iron Riders were taken to different parts of the underground facility for their emergency training. They learned how to move in zero gravity using handholds and magnetic boots. They learned how to put on emergency spacesuits in case the ship lost pressure. They learned where the safe rooms were and what to do if there was a combat situation. It was more information than anyone could really absorb in 2 hours, but the Sentinel crew did their best. Marcus stayed with a crew member named Lieutenant Amy Parker. She was the ship's pilot, and she had kind eyes that reminded Marcus of his mother. Amy showed Marcus around the parts of the ship where he would be allowed to go. She explained that space was dangerous and he needed to always stay in designated safe zones. The ship had artificial gravity in most areas, so Marcus would not float around. But if something went wrong and the gravity failed, he needed to hold on to something and not panic. Amy took Marcus to the bridge, which was the command center of the ship. It had large screens showing stars and planets and all kinds of data that Marcus did not understand. There was a chair in the center where Commander Shaw would sit during the mission. Amy let Marcus sit in the chair for a moment and told him that one day when he was older, he could learn to fly ships like this. Marcus asked if his mother would be proud of him for being brave. Amy said absolutely yes, and that Diana would be amazed at how strong her son was being. Another crew member named Dr. Henry Walsh came to check on Marcus. He was the ship's medical officer and he had a gentle voice. He examined Marcus to make sure the boy was healthy enough for space travel. Henry told Marcus that when they found his mother, she might be scared or hurt. The doctor promised that he would take good care of Diana and make sure she was okay. Marcus thanked him and tried not to think about his mother being in pain. Jake and the other bikers regrouped in what the crew called the mess hall. It was where everyone ate meals. Carlos looked overwhelmed by all the technology he had seen. He kept talking about the ship's engines, which used some kind of exotic matter to bend space. Pete was excited about the computer systems, which were far more advanced than anything on Earth. Lisa was focused on the medical bay and all the equipment there. Danny was quiet, but Marcus could see he was processing everything. Commander Shaw entered the mess hall and told everyone to gather around. He explained that the journey to Saturn would take about 3 days using the ship's faster-than-light drive. The drive did not actually make them go faster than light. Instead, it compressed space in front of the ship and expanded it behind, so they could cover huge distances quickly. It was technology that humans had learned from friendly aliens and adapted for their own use. Shaw said the ride would be smooth, but there might be some disorientation when they entered and exited faster-than-light travel. Shaw also explained what they would face when they reached the Xanthari facility. The facility was built into one of Saturn's smaller moons. It was hidden inside caves and tunnels so it would not show up on normal scans. The Xanthari had about 30 people working there, including guards and scientists. They would be armed with energy weapons that could kill a human instantly. The Sentinel had superior firepower, but Shaw did not want to destroy the facility because that would kill all the human prisoners inside. The plan was to use stealth to get close and then send in a small strike team. Jake and his crew would be part of that team along with Lieutenant Parker and a few others from the Sentinel crew. They would infiltrate the facility and locate the prisoners while the Sentinel stayed hidden nearby, ready to provide support if needed. It was dangerous, but it was the best option they had. Shaw asked if everyone understood, and they all nodded. Final preparations took another hour. The bikers were given lightweight body armor and weapons that shot energy bolts instead of bullets. Jake had never used anything like these weapons, but a crew member showed him the basics. Point and pull the trigger. The weapon did not have recoil, and it never ran out of ammunition because it recharged from a power cell. Jake practiced a few shots at a target range inside the facility and was surprised at how easy it was. Marcus was given a special seat in the ship's observation room where he could watch space but would be protected if anything went wrong. The room had thick reinforced glass and its own life support system. Jake came to see Marcus before the launch. He told the boy that everything was going to be okay. They would find Diana and bring her home. Marcus hugged Jake and made him promise to be careful. Jake promised and ruffled the boy's hair. The crew of the Sentinel took their positions. Commander Shaw sat in his command chair on the bridge. Amy Parker was at the pilot controls. The other stations were manned by experienced crew members who had done this many times before. The Iron Riders were strapped into seats in a passenger area. They could see screens showing the view outside the ship, but they were not needed for the actual flying. Shaw gave the order to launch and the massive underground doors above them began to open. Marcus watched from the observation room as the Sentinel rose slowly off the ground. The engines made a deep humming sound that he could feel in his bones. The ship moved up through the shaft and out into the Nevada desert night. For a moment they hovered there under the stars. Then Shaw gave another order and the engines flared bright blue. The Sentinel shot upward so fast that Marcus was pressed back into his seat, even though the ship had systems to reduce the feeling of acceleration. Within seconds they were out of the atmosphere and in the black of space. Marcus had never seen anything so beautiful. The stars were everywhere and they did not twinkle like they did from Earth. They were steady points of pure light. He could see the curve of the Earth below getting smaller and smaller. Amy's voice came over the intercom. She said they were now in orbit and preparing for faster-than-light jump. Everyone needed to stay seated and stay calm. There would be a strange feeling when they entered FTL, but it would pass quickly. Marcus gripped the arms of his seat and watched the stars. Commander Shaw counted down from 10. When he reached 0, there was a flash of light and the stars seemed to stretch and blur. Marcus felt like his stomach had turned inside out. Colors that should not exist swirled around the ship. Time felt wrong, like seconds were hours and hours were seconds. Then just as suddenly as it started, the feeling stopped. The stars were normal again, but they looked different. The sun was smaller and dimmer. Amy announced they were now in deep space traveling toward Saturn. Estimated arrival time was 72 hours. The first day of travel was strange for everyone. The Iron Riders were not used to being on a spaceship and they kept bumping into things or forgetting which way was up, even though there was artificial gravity. The crew found it amusing, but also helped them adjust. Marcus spent most of his time in the observation room watching space go by. Even at faster-than-light speed, it looked like they were barely moving because space was so vast. Jake came to sit with Marcus several times. They talked about Diana and the good times they would have when she came home. Jake told Marcus stories about his time in the Marines and the things he had seen around the world. Marcus asked Jake if he was scared, and Jake admitted that yes, he was scared. But being scared did not mean you stopped trying. It meant you were smart enough to understand the danger, but brave enough to face it anyway. On the second day, Dr. Henry Walsh gave everyone medical checkups. He wanted to make sure the stress of space travel was not causing problems. He also prepared his medical bay for receiving rescued prisoners. He did not know what condition they would be in, but he had to be ready for anything. Henry showed Marcus some of the medical equipment and explained how it worked. The technology could heal injuries that would be fatal on Earth. That made Marcus feel better about his mother's chances. Carlos spent hours talking to the engineering crew about how the ship worked. He was like a kid in a candy store asking a million questions. The Sentinel's chief engineer, whose name was Lieutenant Gary Stone, was happy to explain things. Gary said humans had come a long way in 15 years of having alien technology. The Sentinel was the 5th generation of Earth defense vessels, and each generation was better than the last. Soon humans would be building ships that were equal to most alien species. Lisa volunteered to help in the medical bay. Henry was grateful for another set of trained hands. They prepared sedatives and pain medications and trauma supplies. Lisa had seen combat wounds before, but she knew alien experiments might be worse. She tried not to think about it too much. Instead, she focused on being ready to help whoever needed it. On the third day, they began to approach Saturn's orbit. The giant planet filled the screens with its beautiful rings and dozens of moons. Amy brought the ship out of faster-than-light travel and they coasted on normal engines. Shaw ordered stealth mode activated. The Sentinel's hull began to absorb all electromagnetic radiation, making the ship nearly invisible to sensors. They moved slowly and carefully toward the moon, where Patricia's intelligence said the Zenthari facility was located. Marcus watched as they got closer to the small moon. It looked gray and lifeless with craters covering its surface. Somewhere down there, his mother was being held prisoner. Commander Shaw stood at the front of the briefing room with a holographic display showing the moon and the hidden Zenthari facility. The strike team sat in chairs facing him. Jake and his crew wore their new armor, which felt heavy but protective. Lieutenant Amy Parker was there along with 4 other Sentinel crew members who were trained for combat operations. Everyone was armed and ready, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Shaw explained that the Sentinel had been scanning the moon for the past 2 hours. They had located the facility entrance hidden in a crater on the dark side of the moon, where Earth sensors could not easily detect it. Heat signatures showed about 30 life forms inside which matched Patricia's intelligence. About 2/3 of those signatures were Zenthari based on their lower body temperature. The rest were human and likely prisoners. The plan was to use a captured Zenthari shuttle that the Sentinel had taken from a smuggler ship months ago. The shuttle had authentic Zenthari transponder codes, so it would not trigger alarms when approaching the facility. Jake and his team would pretend to be a supply delivery. Once they landed inside the facility, they would have to move fast before anyone realized something was wrong. The element of surprise was everything. Amy would pilot the shuttle because she had trained on alien craft. Jake would lead the ground team with Lisa, Carlos, Danny, and Pete backing him up. 3 Sentinel crew members whose names were Lieutenant Kyle Barnes, Sergeant Nina Foster, and Corporal Jeff Palmer would also join them. That made 9 people total, which Shaw said was the maximum he could risk without leaving the Sentinel vulnerable. If the strike team got into trouble, the ship would have to come in with weapons firing, but that was a last resort. Shaw showed them the facility layout based on sensor scans. The main entrance led to a landing bay. From there, a corridor went deeper into the moon toward what appeared to be laboratories and holding cells. The power source was located in the center of the facility, which meant if they could disable it, the Zenthari would be operating in the dark. But that would also cut life support to the prisoners, so it was not a good option unless absolutely necessary. Jake asked how they would know which holding cells had Diana. Shaw said thermal imaging showed that most of the human prisoners were kept in one large room on the lower level. They would have to go there first and extract everyone. It would be harder than just grabbing Diana and running, but Shaw was not willing to leave other victims behind. Jake agreed completely. They would save them all or die trying. The team loaded into the Zenthari shuttle. It was a small craft that smelled strange like chemicals and something organic that made Jake's nose wrinkle. The interior was clearly designed for beings that were not human. The seats were too narrow and positioned at weird angles. But Amy said the shuttle flew well, and that was all that mattered. She took the pilot seat and started the launch sequence. The strange alien controls lit up with symbols that Jake could not read. Marcus came to the shuttle bay to see them off. He looked so small standing there in his oversized jacket. Jake knelt down and told the boy to stay with Dr. Henry and do whatever the crew told him to do. Marcus nodded, but his eyes were full of tears. He asked Jake to tell his mother that he loved her, and that he had been brave. Jake promised he would tell her everything. Then he hugged Marcus and climbed into the shuttle. The shuttle detached from the Sentinel and moved toward the moon. Through the window, Jake could see the gray surface getting closer. Amy was talking to the facility in the Zenthari language, which came out as clicks and whistles. Whatever she said must have worked because the facility acknowledged their approach and gave them clearance to land. Jake gripped his weapon tighter. This was really happening. The shuttle entered a cave opening that was barely visible from space. Inside was a tunnel that had been carved smooth by Zenthari tools. Lights along the walls provided dim illumination. Amy followed the tunnel down and down until it opened into a large chamber. This was the landing bay. Several other Zenthari shuttles were parked there, along with equipment and cargo containers. Amy set their shuttle down gently and powered down the engines. Jake could see movement outside the shuttle window. 2 Zenthari guards were approaching to inspect the new arrival. They were tall and thin with gray skin and those horrible black eyes that looked like pools of oil. They moved with an unsettling grace. Jake signaled his team to get ready. Amy opened the shuttle door and stayed in the pilot seat, while Jake and the others prepared to exit. The 2 Zenthari guards reached the shuttle door. One of them spoke in clicking sounds that Jake did not understand. But before the guard could react, Jake raised his energy weapon and fired. The blue bolt hit the Zenthari in the chest and it dropped without a sound. The second guard tried to reach for its own weapon, but Carlos shot it down just as quickly. Both bodies fell to the floor of the landing bay. Alarms immediately started blaring. So much for the element of surprise. Jake yelled for everyone to move. The team poured out of the shuttle and took cover behind cargo containers. More Zenthari guards came running into the landing bay from the corridor. Energy bolts started flying in both directions. The air crackled with discharged weapons. Pete took down one guard while Nina got another. But there were more coming. Lieutenant Kyle Barnes pulled out a device that looked like a grenade. He threw it down the corridor toward the approaching guards. The device exploded with a bright flash and an electromagnetic pulse. Every light in the landing bay went out and the alarm stopped. In the darkness, Jake heard Zenthari voices making confused sounds. The team had night vision built into their helmets so they could still see. The Zenthari could not. Jake led the charge down the corridor. They moved fast, shooting at any Zenthari they encountered. The aliens were not prepared for a direct assault. Most of them were scientists, not soldiers. But a few were trained guards, and they put up a fight. Danny took a grazing shot to his arm but kept moving. Lisa shot the guard who had hit Danny. The team worked together like they had been doing this for years, even though it had only been a few days since they met Marcus on that road in Montana. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 directions. Shaw's voice came through their helmet communicators. He was monitoring their progress from the Sentinel. He told them to take the left corridor, which led to the holding cells. Jake acknowledged and led the team left. Behind them, they could hear more Zenthari coming. Jeff stayed behind to guard their rear. He set up at the junction with his weapon ready. The corridor sloped downward. The walls were rough stone that had been reinforced with alien metal. Jake could feel the weight of the moon pressing down on him. If there was a structural failure, they would all be crushed or lose atmosphere. He pushed that thought away and kept moving. They had to get to the prisoners. They found a heavy door blocking the corridor. Carlos examined it and said it was locked with an electronic system. He pulled out a tool and started working on the lock. Energy bolts flew past them as more Zenthari guards caught up. The team formed a defensive position around Carlos while he worked. Nina and Kyle returned fire, keeping the guards at bay. Lisa was watching the other direction in case they were flanked. Carlos got the door open with a shout of triumph. They pushed through into another corridor. This one had windows looking into cells. Jake's heart stopped when he saw what was inside. Humans in various states of consciousness floating in cylindrical tanks filled with liquid. Tubes and wires connected them to alien machines. This was the Zenthari research area. These people were being used as test subjects. Jake heard Lisa curse behind him. Pete looked like he was going to be sick, but they did not have time to process what they were seeing. Jake kept moving down the corridor, looking into each cell window. He was searching for Diana. Behind them, they could hear Jeff still firing at approaching guards. They needed to find the prisoners and get out fast before the Zenthari overwhelmed them. At the end of the corridor was a larger room. Through the window, Jake could see multiple tanks arranged in rows. In the 3rd row, he saw her, Diana Williams, floating unconscious in one of the tanks. She looked pale, and there were marks on her skin from where the Zenthari had taken samples. But she was alive. Jake felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost brought him to his knees. They had found her. Carlos ran to the control panel and started working. He said all the tanks were connected to one system. If he could override it, he could drain all the tanks and release all the prisoners at once. Jake told him to do it. They were not leaving anyone behind. Carlos's fingers flew over the alien controls. He was brilliant with technology, and even though this was completely foreign, he was figuring it out. The tanks began to drain. The liquid inside turned cloudy and then clear as it was pumped away. The people inside started to wake up, gasping and confused. The tank doors opened automatically, and the prisoners stumbled out, still connected to tubes and wires. Lisa and Nina ran forward to help them. They started pulling tubes out and disconnecting wires as gently as they could. The prisoners were weak and disoriented but alive. Diana fell out of her tank and would have hit the floor, but Jake caught her. Her eyes opened and she looked at him in confusion. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the breathing tube. Diana Williams crouched behind an overturned medical table while energy bolts flew overhead. Her mind was struggling to understand what was happening. One moment she had been unconscious in a nightmare filled with pain and alien faces. The next moment she was free and there was a battle happening around her. She looked at the bearded man who had caught her when she fell. He was shooting at the gray creatures that had tortured her for days. He had said something about Marcus, her son. Marcus was safe. That thought cut through the fog in Diana's brain like a knife. Marcus was safe. These people, whoever they were, had come to rescue her. She needed to help them not hide behind furniture. Diana looked around and saw one of the Zenthari guards lying dead near her. Its weapon had fallen from its hand and was just a few feet away. Diana crawled forward, ignoring the weakness in her limbs, and grabbed the alien weapon. The weapon was lighter than it looked. Diana had never fired a gun in her life, but desperation made her brave. She stood up and pointed the weapon at a Zenthari guard who was advancing on the man with the beard. She pulled what looked like a trigger and the weapon fired. The bolt hit the guard in the back and it fell. The bearded man looked at Diana in surprise. She gave him a grim smile. Nobody was going to take her from her son ever again. Lisa saw Diana fighting and felt a surge of respect. The woman had just been rescued from alien experimentation, and she was already in the fight. Lisa shouted for Diana to get down as more guards entered the room. There were too many of them. The strike team was being overwhelmed. Carlos was still trying to help the other prisoners who were too weak to move on their own. Danny was on the ground bleeding from his leg wound. Jeff had fallen back from the junction and was now fighting alongside them. Things were getting desperate. Jake spoke into his helmet communicator and called for Commander Shaw. He said they had the prisoners, but they were pinned down by heavy resistance. They needed extraction now, or they were not going to make it out. Shaw's voice came back tense but controlled. He said the Sentinel was moving into position. Hold on for 2 more minutes. 2 minutes felt like an eternity when people were shooting at you. One of the Zenthari guards threw a device into the room. It looked like a grenade. Kyle yelled a warning and dove on top of it to shield the others. The device exploded with a flash of heat and light. Kyle's armor took most of the blast, but the force threw him against the wall. He did not get up. Nina screamed and ran to him. His armor was cracked and smoking. Nina pulled off his helmet and checked for a pulse. She looked up at Jake with tears in her eyes and shook her head. Kyle was gone. Jake felt rage build inside him. These creatures had taken innocent people from their homes. They had tortured them and experimented on them. They had killed a good man who was just trying to save others. Jake stood up from cover and advanced on the Zenthari guards, firing with every step. His weapon bolts found their targets. 3 guards fell, 4, 5, the others started to retreat. Jake kept advancing like a force of nature. Carlos got the last of the prisoners disconnected from the machines. There were 12 humans total, including Diana. Most of them could barely walk. Pete and Lisa helped carry the weakest ones. Diana refused to be carried. She held on to her stolen Zenthari weapon and stayed on her feet through sheer will. She asked the bearded man where her son was. Jake told her Marcus was on the ship waiting for her. Diana said then they needed to move because she had waited long enough to see her boy. The team started moving back toward the corridor. Nina carried Kyle's body. She refused to leave him behind. Danny limped along with Carlos, supporting him. The rescued prisoners stumbled forward as fast as they could. Jake led the way, shooting at any Zenthari who appeared. Diana walked beside him, adding her fire. Together, they fought their way back through the facility. They reached the landing bay just as the ceiling began to shake. Dust and small rocks fell from above. Commander Shaw's voice came through the communicators. The Sentinel had opened fire on the facility's external defenses. The moon was not structurally stable, and the weapons fire was causing tremors. They needed to evacuate immediately, or the whole facility might collapse. Amy had the shuttle ready with engines running. The team loaded the prisoners on board. It was cramped with so many people, but they made it work. Jeff did a quick head count. 12 prisoners, 8 strike team members, including Kyle's body, and Amy the pilot. 21 people in a shuttle meant for 10. Amy said it would be tight, but the shuttle could handle it. She sealed the door and lifted off. As the shuttle rose out of the landing bay, Diana looked back at the facility. A Zenthari was standing in the doorway watching them leave. It was taller than the others and wore different clothing. This must be someone important. Maybe the scientist in charge? The Zenthari raised one long arm, not in threat, but almost in farewell or maybe apology. Diana raised her weapon and fired. The bolt struck the doorway next to the Zenthari. She had missed on purpose. Let that creature live with the knowledge that humans had beaten them. The shuttle flew through the tunnel and emerged into space. Behind them, the moon's surface was beginning to crack. Shaw's weapons had destabilized the cave system. The Zenthari facility was collapsing in on itself. Anyone still inside was not getting out. Diana felt no pity. Those creatures had shown her no mercy. They had treated her like she was not even a person. Now they were paying the price. The Sentinel came into view and Diana gasped. It was a massive warship floating in space like a metal whale. She had no idea humans had ships like this. The man next to her, whose name she still did not know, explained that a lot had changed in the world. There were things the government did not tell people. Diana said she could believe that after what she had been through. The shuttle docked with the Sentinel and the doors opened. Medical crew rushed forward with stretchers. Dr. Henry Walsh immediately began triaging the rescued prisoners. Diana tried to push past the medical crew. She was looking for someone. She called out Marcus's name. A small voice answered from across the docking bay. Diana turned and saw her son running toward her. Marcus crashed into his mother's arms and they both fell to the floor holding each other and crying. Diana could not believe he was real. She had dreamed of seeing him again every moment she was conscious in that horrible place. Now here he was, solid and warm and alive. Marcus kept saying he knew they would find her. He knew the bikers would keep their promise. Diana looked up at Jake with questions in her eyes. Jake knelt down beside them and introduced himself properly. He explained how Marcus had run to the road and flagged down the Iron Riders, how they had believed his story and decided to help, how they had traveled to Nevada and convinced Commander Shaw to mount a rescue mission, how they had crossed space to reach her. Diana listened in amazement. These strangers had risked everything for her family. She asked Jake why, and he said because it was the right thing to do. Dr. Henry gently separated Diana from Marcus so he could examine her. She had injuries that needed treatment. The Zenthari had taken tissue samples from multiple locations and some of the wounds were infected. Henry said she would need surgery and several days of recovery. But she would be fine. Diana agreed to treatment but made Henry promise Marcus could stay with her. Henry said of course the boy could stay. As Diana was taken to the medical bay on a stretcher, she held Marcus's hand. She looked back at the strike team one more time. These brave people had given her back her life and her son. She saw that one of them was being carried on a stretcher covered with a sheet. Someone had died to save her. Diana felt guilt wash over her. Jake saw her expression and came over. He told her that Kyle had died doing what he believed in. Saving innocent people. It was not her fault. Lisa was helping Danny to medical for treatment of his leg wound. Carlos was talking to the engineering crew about the Zenthari technology they had seen. Pete was downloading data from a device he had grabbed in the facility. Nina was standing alone near Kyle's covered body. Her face was blank, but her eyes were full of pain. The cost of this mission had been high. Commander Shaw entered the docking bay and surveyed the scene. 21 people rescued, including the strike team. 1 crew member dead, the Zenthari facility destroyed. The mission was a success, but it did not feel like victory. Shaw walked over to Nina and put his hand on her shoulder. He said Kyle died a hero and would be honored. Nina nodded but did not speak. Shaw then went to where Diana was being loaded into a medical transport. He introduced himself and told her that she was safe now. No one would hurt her again. Diana thanked him through her tears. Shaw said she should thank her son. Marcus was the one who had made all of this possible. Without his courage and determination, they would never have known she was taken. Marcus looked up at the commander with wide eyes. Shaw saluted the boy. Marcus tried to salute back, and Shaw smiled. The Sentinel turned away from the collapsing moon and began the journey back to Earth. In the medical bay, Dr. Henry worked on the rescued prisoners. Most of them would recover physically, but the psychological scars would take years to heal. Some might never fully recover. But they were alive and they were free, and that was what mattered. 5 days after the battle, the Sentinel entered Earth's atmosphere. Diana Williams sat in the observation room with Marcus on her lap, watching their home planet grow larger in the window. She had spent the journey recovering from her injuries, both physical and mental. Dr. Henry had done excellent work repairing the damage the Zenthari had inflicted. But some scars would never fully heal. Diana knew she would have nightmares for years. But she also knew she was alive and she had her son, and that was what mattered. The ship landed at the underground facility in Nevada where this journey had started. But this time there were differences. News crews were camped outside the perimeter. Government officials were waiting to debrief everyone involved. The secret was out and now there would be consequences. Commander Shaw had already been informed that he would face a military tribunal for his unauthorized mission. He accepted this without complaint. He had known the risks. Patricia Hayes was waiting in the landing bay when the Sentinel touched down. She had spent the past 5 days doing damage control and trying to shape the narrative. The governments had wanted to deny everything, but the video evidence was too clear. Instead, they had shifted to a strategy of controlled disclosure. Patricia had made sure the story focused on the bravery of the rescue mission and the threat the Zenthari posed. Public opinion was firmly on the side of the Sentinel crew. Jake and the Iron Riders were the first ones off the ship. They had changed back into their regular clothes and looked out of place in the military facility. A crowd of officials and reporters surged forward asking questions. Jake ignored them and looked for Patricia. She pushed through the crowd and greeted him with a handshake that turned into a hug. She said they had done something extraordinary. The world was demanding answers and changes. This was the push that was needed. Diana and Marcus came down the ramp next. Diana was still weak and leaned on a medical assistant for support. But when she saw the crowd, she stood straighter. She would not show weakness in front of these people. Reporters shouted questions at her. What was it like being abducted? How did the Xanthari treat her? What did she think about aliens being real? Diana ignored them all. She only had eyes for Jake, who was waiting at the bottom of the ramp. Marcus ran to Jake and hugged his leg. Diana walked over more slowly and stood next to the big biker. The cameras captured the moment. A mother and son reunited with the man who had saved them. It became the image that defined the whole event. News outlets around the world ran that photo on their front pages. The caption usually read something about ordinary heroes doing extraordinary things. The other rescued prisoners were taken to a secure medical facility for continued treatment. Most of them had families who were being notified. Reunions were being arranged, but it would be a long road to recovery for all of them. Some would struggle with trauma for the rest of their lives, but they were alive and free, and that was because of the brave people who had risked everything to save them. Commander Shaw emerged from the ship last. He was immediately surrounded by military officials. Some looked angry, but others looked respectful. Shaw had violated orders, but he had also saved lives and exposed a threat that the government had been ignoring. It was complicated. Shaw was escorted away for debriefing. As he left, he looked back at Jake and gave a small nod. Jake nodded back. No words were needed. The Iron Riders were taken to a conference room where they were questioned for hours. Government agents wanted to know every detail of the mission, how they had gotten involved, what they had seen in the Xanthari facility, what they knew about alien technology. Jake and his crew answered honestly. They had nothing to hide. When asked why they had done it, Jake gave a simple answer. Because it was the right thing to do. After the questioning, Jake asked if he and his crew were in trouble. The lead agent said no. Technically, they had acted as civilian consultants under Commander Shaw's authority. Shaw was taking full responsibility for the mission. The government was actually considering giving the Iron Riders some kin. The Sentinel was 3 hours into its journey back to Earth when the alarm started blaring. Commander Shaw rushed to the bridge where Amy was at the controls. She pointed at the sensor display with a worried expression. 3 Xanthari warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel and were moving to intercept them. Shaw cursed under his breath. The destroyed facility must have sent out a distress signal before it collapsed. Now the Xanthari wanted revenge. Shaw ordered Amy to change course and increase speed. The Sentinel was fast, but it was also carrying extra passengers and was not in peak condition after the battle. The Xanthari ships were smaller but more maneuverable. They were built for speed in combat. Shaw knew his ship could probably take one of them, maybe even 2. But 3 at once while protecting rescued prisoners was going to be nearly impossible. In the medical bay, Dr. Henry heard the alarms and immediately began securing his patients. Diana sat up in her bed and pulled Marcus close. She asked what was happening. Henry told her honestly that they were being pursued. Diana's face went pale. She had just escaped from the Xanthari and now they were coming after her again. Marcus held his mother's hand and told her it would be okay. Commander Shaw would protect them. Diana wished she had her son's faith. Jake and the other Iron Riders ran to the bridge. They asked Shaw what they could do to help. Shaw appreciated the offer but said there was not much. This was a ship-to-ship battle. The bikers were not trained for naval combat. Jake refused to accept that. He asked if the ship had weapons that needed manning. Shaw said yes, but his crew was already at those stations. Jake said then give them something else to do. They had not come this far to sit around while others fought. Shaw thought for a moment, then told Jake to take his crew to the weapons locker. If the Xanthari managed to board the ship, they would need people to repel them. Jake nodded and led his crew away. Lisa went back to medical to help Henry protect the patients. Carlos went to engineering to assist if the ship took damage. Pete went to the communication station to monitor Xanthari transmissions. Everyone had a role. The Xanthari ships opened fire. Energy bolts streaked across space and slammed into the Sentinel shields. The shields held, but Shaw knew they would not last forever. He ordered Amy to take evasive maneuvers. The big ship rolled and twisted through space, dodging most of the incoming fire. Shaw returned fire with the Sentinel's main weapons. His shots were more accurate, and one of the Zenthari ships took damage to its engines, but the other two Zenthari ships split up and came at the Sentinel from different angles. It was a classic pincer move. Shaw could not dodge both of them. He had to choose which threat to focus on. He chose the ship on the left because it was closer to landing a critical hit. The Sentinel's weapons tore into that ship's hull. Atmosphere vented from multiple breaches. The Zenthari ship fell back trailing debris. The ship on the right took advantage of Shaw's distraction and fired a barrage of missiles. They were too close for the Sentinel to dodge. The missiles hit the starboard side and explosions rocked the ship. Lights flickered on the bridge. Damage reports started coming in. The shields were down to 30%. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Casualties in engineering. The Sentinel was hurt. Carlos was in engineering when the missiles hit. He was thrown against a wall and felt something in his ribs crack. But he got up and helped the engineering crew seal the hull breaches. Chief Engineer Gary Stone was coordinating repairs while also trying to keep the engines running. One of the power conduits had ruptured and was spewing plasma. Gary grabbed a tool and went to fix it himself. Carlos followed to help. In medical, the lights went red, indicating emergency power. Some of the equipment shut down. Henry worked frantically to keep his patient stable. Diana got out of bed despite her injuries and helped. She had no medical training, but she could follow instructions. She held pressure on a wound while Henry worked on another patient. Marcus stayed close to his mother, refusing to leave her side even when Henry told him to hide. On the bridge, Shaw made a difficult decision. He could not win this fight while protecting the ship and its passengers. He needed help, but the nearest Earth defense vessel was hours away. He did something he had never done before. He sent out a general distress call on all frequencies, including civilian channels. He broadcast that the Sentinel was under attack by Zenthari forces and requested immediate assistance from any ship in range. For a long minute, there was no response. Then Patricia Hayes's voice came through the communicator. She was still in the underground facility on Earth monitoring the situation. She said she had received Shaw's distress call and was forwarding it to every contact she had. She also said she was contacting the media. It was time for the world to know what was happening. Shaw hesitated, then agreed. The secret was going to come out one way or another. Better it happen while they were fighting to protect innocent people. News channels across Earth suddenly interrupted their regular programming. Videos of the space battle were being broadcast live from the Sentinel's external cameras. Millions of people watched in shock as human and alien ships fought in the darkness of space. The news anchors struggled to explain what they were seeing. Government scrambled to control the narrative, but it was too late. The truth was out. 2 more Zenthari ships arrived. Now there were 4 against 1. The Sentinel was running out of options. Shaw ordered all power diverted to weapons and shields. Life support was reduced to minimum. The temperature on the ship dropped. Gravity fluctuated. But the weapons fired harder and the shields held a little longer. Shaw was buying time, but he did not know what he was buying time for. Then something unexpected happened. 3 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel between the Sentinel and the Zenthari vessels. They were Earth defense vessels just like the Sentinel. Shaw recognized their transponder codes. The EDS Valor commanded by Captain Rachel Stone, the EDS Guardian commanded by Captain Frank Miller, and the EDS Defender commanded by Captain Susan Lee. Patricia had gotten through to them. The cavalry had arrived. The 3 ships immediately opened fire on the Zenthari. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Now it was 4 human ships against 4 Zenthari ships. But human ships were tougher and better armed. The Zenthari had relied on surprise and numbers. Now they had neither. Captain Stone's voice came through the communicator. She asked Shaw if he was all right. Shaw said he had been better, but he was still in the fight. The 4 Earth defense vessels worked in coordination. They had trained together and knew each other's tactics. The Zenthari ships tried to adapt, but they were outmatched. One by one, the alien vessels took critical damage. The first Zenthari ship that Shaw had damaged earlier exploded when a missile from the Valor hit its reactor. The second ship's engines were destroyed by the Guardian, and it began drifting helpless in space. The remaining 2 Zenthari ships realized they could not win. They broke off and tried to escape. But Captain Lee in the Defender was the fastest pilot in the fleet. She pursued them and disabled their faster-than-light drives with precision shots. The Zenthari ships were trapped. Shaw ordered them to surrender. After a tense moment, they complied. Their weapons powered down and they transmitted surrender codes. On the Sentinel, the crew erupted in cheers. They had won. Jake and his crew hugged each other in relief. In medical, Diana held Marcus and cried tears of joy. Henry allowed himself a moment to breathe before getting back to work. In engineering, Carlos and Gary collapsed against a wall, exhausted but alive. The battle was over. Shaw established a communication link with the surrendered Zenthari ships. A face appeared on the screen. It was a Zenthari, but unlike the others Shaw had seen, this one looked old and tired. It identified itself as Kelvax, the chief scientist from the destroyed facility. Kelvax said he had survived the collapse by being in a ship when it happened. He had called for military backup to retrieve the escaped prisoners. Shaw asked Kelvax why the Zenthari were so desperate that they would violate galactic law and risk war with Earth. Kelvax explained that his species was dying. Their genetic diversity had collapsed after centuries of cloning and genetic manipulation. They needed fresh DNA to survive. Human DNA was compatible in ways that no other species was. Without it, the Zenthari would be extinct within 2 generations. Shaw felt a moment of sympathy, but it passed quickly. He told Kelvax that desperation did not justify kidnapping and torture. If the Zenthari had asked for help, if they had explained their situation and offered fair trade, humans might have helped them. But instead, they had chosen to take by force. They had treated humans like animals. Now they would face the consequences. Kelvax's expression was hard to read on his alien face. He said his species had believed humans were too primitive to understand or care. They had been wrong. Humans were more than they appeared. Kelvax asked what would happen to him and his crew now. Shaw said they would be taken to Earth and held accountable for their crimes. There would be a trial. Justice would be served. The Earth defense vessels formed an escort around the captured Zenthari ships and the Sentinel. Together they began the journey back to Earth. It would take several days, but they would make it. Shaw sat in his command chair and allowed himself to relax for the first time in hours.